What if the most shocking royal interview of our time, the Oprah Winfrey sit-down that rattled Buckingham Palace and split public opinion across the world, wasn't a candid conversation at all, but instead a carefully scripted performance? Imagine discovering that the gasps, the tears, and the pauses that seemed so raw were in fact rehearsed, practiced in private like scenes from a stage play. Sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? But here we are, with Meghan Markle at the age of 44 finally confirming what so many suspected but few dared to say aloud. The Oprah interview was never truly spontaneous. It was orchestrated, polished, and delivered with one purpose in mind: maximum impact. Pause for a second. Do you remember where you were on the night of March 7th, 2021, when Oprah leaned forward and asked Meghan, "Were you silent or were you silenced?" That single moment felt like lightning striking across the world. Twitter exploded. News outlets scrambled. Families argued in their living rooms. Some shed tears of sympathy, others clenched fists in anger. The globe was united for a few hours in rapt attention, hooked on every word that Meghan and Harry spoke. It was hailed as raw honesty. But what if it wasn't? What if the truth was far more calculated? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This revelation matters now more than ever. In the years since that interview, the Sussexes' reputation has spiraled in unpredictable ways, sometimes soaring on waves of sympathy, sometimes crashing under scrutiny and backlash. Meghan's recent admission, subtle but unmistakable, tears open the curtain behind which this dramatic performance was staged. It's no longer just about the feud with the royal family. It's about something larger. The manipulation of trust, the blurring of reality and performance, and the uncomfortable question of whether the public was misled by a production dressed up as truth. Think about how you felt watching that interview. Were you shocked when Meghan claimed that Archie had been denied a title because of his race? Did you feel anger when she said palace officials ignored her cries for mental health support? Did your heart ache as Harry described feeling trapped by the system? These were not ordinary revelations. They were cultural earthquakes, reshaping perceptions of monarchy, race, and power. But here's the twist. The exact emotions you felt may not have been accidental. They may have been carefully anticipated and orchestrated long before the cameras rolled. We live in a world where authenticity is currency. Celebrities rise and fall on their ability to convince us that what they show is real. But what happens when the line between performance and truth is erased entirely? Meghan's confession forces us to confront that question head-on. If the Oprah interview was rehearsed, exaggerated, and twisted, then what else in the Sussex saga has been stage-managed? How many other truth bombs were polished until they gleamed under studio lights? The fascinating irony is that Meghan herself is a trained actress. Before she was a duchess, before she was a mother, before she was a global headline, she was Rachel Zane on Suits, delivering scripted lines with poise and precision. Acting was her craft. Projection was her skill. Could it be that the most famous role of her life was not on a Hollywood set, but in a Montecito backyard with Oprah as her scene partner? And if that's the case, then who was the audience? The Queen? The palace? Or was it us? All of us, sitting at home, absorbing every word? And let's not forget Oprah herself. A seasoned interviewer, a cultural titan, a woman who built her empire on authenticity and connection. Was she, too, swept up in the performance? Or was she simply the perfect vessel, delivering the lines to millions without knowing she was part of a rehearsed act? That's the uncomfortable shadow looming over her legacy as well. Now, you might be asking yourself, why confirm this now? Why would Meghan, after years of defending the interview as her truth, finally let slip that it was rehearsed? Is it guilt? Is it a calculated rebrand? Or is it a recognition that the narrative is slipping from her control and confession is the only way to regain it? At 44, Meghan has lived long enough to understand how history cements reputations. Perhaps this was her way of rewriting hers, by admitting to the stagecraft before the audience fully turns on her. Here's another question for you. Have you ever believed in a story so deeply, only to find out later that it wasn't true? That gut-wrenching mix of betrayal and disbelief is what many are feeling now. Millions of people defended Meghan fiercely, pointing to her words in that interview as gospel truth. Millions of others condemned her, convinced she was lying. And now we learn. Both sides may have been wrong, because the truth was rehearsed in private sessions designed to tug precisely on those emotional strings. Think of the power behind that. A single interview generated headlines for months, influenced public opinion, and shifted the global conversation about race, mental health, and monarchy. It was arguably more impactful than any royal press release in modern history. And yet, its foundations were not as organic as we believed. Doesn't that change how you see everything that followed? The Netflix series, the memoir, the podcasts? If the Oprah interview was scripted, can anything else be taken at face value? The timing of Meghan's revelation is not random. Public perception of her and Harry has changed dramatically since they left royal life. The couple who once commanded global sympathy now face skepticism and ridicule. Projects have failed. Contracts have been lost. Public trust has eroded. By confessing now, Meghan reignites curiosity, forces headlines back into her orbit, and perhaps, paradoxically, seeks to regain some control by admitting manipulation on her own terms rather than having it exposed by someone else. Here's the contradiction. By admitting the interview was scripted, Meghan risks destroying the very thing that made her sympathetic. But she also opens the door to a new narrative, that she's finally telling the truth after years of half-truths. It's a gamble, and it's a gamble with stakes higher than ever, because this isn't just about Meghan and Harry anymore. It's about trust in public storytelling, trust in celebrities, and trust in the media itself. We need to talk about why this story matters now. The world has changed since 2021. The pandemic that framed the Oprah interview has faded into memory. The Queen, who loomed silently in the background of those accusations, has passed away. King Charles reigns. Prince William and Kate have stepped more firmly into the spotlight. And Meghan and Harry? They are no longer newcomers. They are veterans of media manipulation, veterans of public backlash. This confession lands in a very different world, one that is perhaps less forgiving, more skeptical, and more eager for the truth behind the drama. So here we are, standing at the threshold of a story that refuses to die. Meghan Markle's confession is not just another headline. It's a key that unlocks new ways of understanding the past, present, and future of the Sussex saga. And it forces us to ask the questions that sting the most. If the Oprah interview was scripted, what else was? What does that say about Meghan and Harry's entire brand of authenticity? And can they ever be trusted again? But before we dive into the details of how the rehearsals happened, what was said, and what was deliberately exaggerated, let's pause for one final thought. The interview that many believed was a spontaneous, vulnerable cry for help may instead have been the greatest performance of Meghan's life. And if that's true, then every single person who watched it, whether in sympathy or in anger, was part of the audience for a show designed to provoke exactly those feelings. And when you hear what Meghan confessed about those private rehearsals, about the twisting of events and the exaggeration of pain, you'll never look at the Oprah interview the same way again. The world stopped on the evening of March 7, 2021. Do you remember that night? Oprah Winfrey sat in a lush Montecito garden, facing Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the couple who had dared to walk away from royal life. Millions tuned in across the globe. Every television network, every social media feed, every family conversation seemed to orbit around that interview. But here's the shocking truth we now know. While the audience thought they were witnessing raw vulnerability, they were actually watching one of the most carefully orchestrated performances in modern history. Let's rewind to that night and feel the weight of what unfolded. Oprah, the queen of candid confessions, leaned in with her signature mix of empathy and intensity. Meghan's voice quivered as she described feeling trapped. Harry's eyes darted with a mix of pain and defiance. Each word felt spontaneous. Each pause seemed heavy with unspoken truth. Around the world, people gasped. People cried. Some even changed how they viewed the British monarchy forever. But now, years later, with Meghan herself finally admitting that the interview was rehearsed and exaggerated, we have to ask, were we watching truth? Or a theatrical performance designed to provoke exactly those reactions? The cultural earthquake was immediate. Headlines the next morning screamed with fury and sympathy. Royal racism exposed. Meghan says she was silenced. Harry reveals family rift. These weren't just headlines. They were cannon blasts in the centuries-old institution of the monarchy. And yet, If those lines were rehearsed, if those revelations were sharpened in advance for maximum emotional impact, then doesn't that change how we see the fallout? Imagine a courtroom where the key witness rehearses their testimony not to tell the truth, but to sway the jury. The audience that night was the jury, and we all walked away with verdicts already planted in our minds. Think about your own reaction. Did you sympathize with Meghan when she said her pleas for mental health support were ignored? Did you feel outrage when she described unnamed royals questioning the skin color of her unborn child? Or did you roll your eyes, convinced it was a smear campaign against the monarchy? Whatever side you fell on, you were reacting to a narrative crafted for maximum impact. Meghan's confession at 44 doesn't just poke holes in that night's drama. It rips the curtain wide open. Let's break down how massive this was. More than 17 million people watched live in the US alone. Millions more around the world caught the rebroadcasts and endless social media clips. In Britain, the interview was a cultural bombshell, threatening to erode centuries of carefully constructed royal mystique. In America, Meghan and Harry were hailed as brave truth-tellers, finally escaping the cold machinery of monarchy. Politicians weighed in. Activists rallied around Meghan. The couple became symbols of modern rebellion against archaic tradition. That's the power the Oprah interview wielded. Power we now know was rooted not entirely in honesty, but in performance. And let's not forget the ripple effects. The interview led to official palace statements. Remember Queen Elizabeth's careful words, "Recollections may vary"? Those 3 words became a cultural meme, a subtle but cutting rebuttal to Meghan and Harry's claims. The interview also cemented divisions between Harry and his brother William, creating one of the most publicized sibling rifts in royal history. Every detail of that fallout now looks different under the light of Meghan's confession. If the foundation of the drama was rehearsed, then the family war it ignited was built on manipulated emotion. Ask yourself, how many friendships, how many online debates, how many arguments around dinner tables were sparked by that interview? People unfollowed each other on social media. Families clashed over whether Meghan was a victim or a manipulator. And all along, behind closed doors, she and Harry may have been rehearsing lines, perfecting their timing, practicing which pauses would generate the most sympathy. Isn't that staggering? The global impact can't be overstated. For weeks, it was the top story on every continent. It overshadowed politics, pandemics, and global crises. Meghan and Harry's words became gospel to some, ammunition to others. And yet, what if that gospel was edited in advance like a script? Imagine how betrayed the public feels knowing they weren't invited into truth, but into a theatrical production stage for their tears and gasps. The emotional manipulation was breathtaking in its precision. Meghan's revelation about suicidal thoughts was delivered at exactly the right point in the interview to maximize sympathy. Harry's story about being financially cut off came just as the audience was primed to see him as vulnerable. Each bombshell wasn't just dropped. It was placed carefully, like a director arranging scenes for maximum cinematic effect. And that's the cruel irony. The most explosive truth wasn't raw. It was polished. But why does this matter now? Because the Oprah interview didn't just impact the Sussexes, it changed how the world views institutions of power. It sparked debates on race, mental health, and generational trauma. If those debates were fueled by manipulated narratives, then the cultural conversation itself was shaped on shaky ground. That realization cuts deep. It makes us question the very stories we trust, not just from Meghan and Harry, but from anyone in the spotlight. Do you remember the memes, the hashtags, the endless commentary that followed? Hashtag We Stand With Meghan trended for days. Celebrities chimed in with messages of solidarity. Critics labeled the monarchy archaic and cruel. Supporters of the Queen rallied back, branding Meghan a liar. It was a cultural war, fought with tweets and think pieces. And all of it, every angry word, every tearful defense, might have been sparked by a performance rehearsed in advance. Here's the question that lingers. How does history record that moment now? For years, the Oprah interview was considered a turning point, a moment of courage, of speaking truth to power. But Meghan's confession at 44 reframes it as something else entirely, not courage, but calculation, not truth, but theater. The impact doesn't fade because of this revelation. It grows more complicated, more damning. And yet, The greatest twist is this. Even if it was scripted, the interview worked. It achieved its goal. It made Meghan and Harry the most talked-about couple on Earth. It damaged the monarchy's reputation. It generated sympathy, outrage, and attention. In the short term, it delivered everything it promised. But long term, the cracks have widened. And Meghan's confession is the wrecking ball that may shatter whatever credibility remains. Because here's the thing. Once trust is broken, it can never be fully repaired. People will rewatch that interview differently now, scrutinizing every pause, every tear, every side glance. Was that genuine? Was that rehearsed? Was that line exaggerated? The questions will haunt not just Meghan and Harry, but the very legacy of that night. And the most chilling part? The Oprah interview may have only been the beginning. If that performance was scripted, what does that mean for everything that followed? The Netflix series, Harry's memoir Spare, the endless podcast episodes. If one piece of their story was exaggerated, can we trust any of it? But before we answer that, before we uncover just how deep the rehearsals went and which stories were twisted beyond recognition, we need to examine the most pressing question of all. Why? At 44, did Meghan finally choose to admit it? Because once the first rehearsal detail slipped out, everything else followed. And that's where the story takes a darker, more shocking turn. Why now? Why at 44 years old did Meghan Markle finally decide to reveal what many suspected but few could prove? That the Oprah interview, the crown jewel of her and Harry's media crusade, was scripted? This is the question that lingers, like smoke after a fire. The timing is too curious, too pointed, to be dismissed as coincidence. And if there's one thing Meghan has proven time and again, it's that nothing in her world is ever left to chance. Picture Meghan today. She's not the 30-something newlywed we saw walking down the aisle in Windsor, radiant in Givenchy lace. She's no longer the young mother defending her newborn against palace tradition. At 44, she stands at a crossroads. No longer new to royal exile, no longer the fresh face of rebellion, but a seasoned player in the brutal game of global perception. And perhaps for the first time, she's realizing that her greatest weapon, her narrative, is slipping from her control. Let's be blunt, Meghan's reputation is fractured. In the years since that Oprah interview, her and Harry's star power has dimmed. The Netflix series sparked curiosity, but also criticism. Spotify cut ties. The Archetypes podcast, once hyped as a platform for women's voices, fizzled. The couple has been ridiculed in South Park, lampooned in tabloids, and questioned even by former allies. For a woman whose brand is tightly woven around the idea of authenticity, the cracks are impossible to ignore. And when credibility begins to crumble, sometimes the only way to regain control is to confess, to tell a piece of the truth before someone else exposes the whole of it. But here's the contradiction. Why confess to something so damning? Why admit that an interview hailed as historic truth-telling was, in fact, rehearsed? Could it be that Meghan believes confession will soften the blow? That by admitting to manipulation on her terms, she can recast herself not as a liar, but as a flawed, complicated human being who finally dares to come clean? There's an old Hollywood trick. If you expose your own secrets first, you deny your critics the power of revelation. Is Meghan applying that same strategy now? Let's dive deeper. At 44, Meghan is old enough to recognize how history cements reputations. She knows that the window to redefine her legacy is narrowing. Think of other public figures who made late career confessions. Athletes who admitted to doping after their bodies could no longer compete. Actors who revealed closeted truths after decades of silence. Politicians who penned memoirs full of half-apologies. Meghan's confession fits that mold. It's not just about the past. It's about shaping how she will be remembered in the decades to come. But what pushed her to do it now, specifically? Consider the broader context. The Queen has passed away. King Charles has taken the throne. William and Kate have risen as the dependable faces of the monarchy. The once explosive Sussex narrative now feels like a fading echo. Meghan, once at the center of the world's attention, risks becoming irrelevant. And for someone who has built an empire on visibility, irrelevance is the kiss of death. By confirming suspicions about the Oprah interview, Meghan reignites the fire. She drags the world's gaze back onto her, even if it means burning some of the sympathy she once relied on. Still, the confession leaves a sour taste. For those who defended Meghan fiercely, it feels like betrayal. For those who condemned her, it feels like vindication. And yet, Meghan is too intelligent not to anticipate both reactions. Perhaps that's the point. Perhaps she thrives on contradiction, on stirring equal measures of sympathy and outrage. Because as long as people are talking about her, whether in love or in hate, she wins. The question now becomes, what did she actually admit? How deep does the scripting go? Were entire stories fabricated? Or were small details exaggerated to heighten emotion? The scope of her confession will determine how much damage it does, or how much control it regains. And that's where the real intrigue begins. Because once we start pulling on the thread of rehearsals, we unravel something far bigger. We uncover the private coaching sessions, the deliberate shaping of narratives, the moments of truth twisted into performance. And in those details lies the heart of the scandal. Not just that the Oprah interview was scripted, but that it was engineered to change history itself. And when you hear how those rehearsals actually unfolded, who was in the room, what was said, and how the stories were molded, you'll see that Meghan's confession is only the tip of the iceberg. The real drama lies beneath the surface. Close your eyes and imagine this. Not the glowing Montecito garden with Oprah seated across from Meghan and Harry, but a very different room, quiet, private, and far away from cameras. A room where Meghan paces with notes in her hand. Harry sits nearby, looking uneasy. An aide or trusted confidant leans in, suggesting how to phrase a line. A mirror reflects Meghan's expressions as she practices the pauses, the tears, the quivers in her voice. This wasn't spontaneous vulnerability. This was rehearsal. Behind closed doors, before the cameras ever rolled, the interview was shaped, molded, rehearsed like a performance. The garden we all saw was just the stage. The truth of how it came together is where the real story begins. Why rehearse? Why script something that was supposed to be raw truth? Because Meghan and Harry weren't just sharing their feelings. They were launching their new brand. Remember, by the time of the Oprah interview, they had already left the monarchy. They were outsiders, trying to carve a space for themselves in America and beyond. Their power didn't lie in titles anymore. It lay in the narrative they could craft. And narratives, when done right, are never left to chance. Think about how Hollywood works. An actor doesn't step onto a set and just wing it. Every line is rehearsed, every camera angle tested. Meghan, a trained actress, understood this better than anyone. To her, the Oprah interview was not just a chat, it was a production. And like any production, it required rehearsal. Picture Meghan sitting Harry down, scripts or notes in hand. When she asks you about finances, remember to emphasize how they cut you off, she might say. Or perhaps, when I talk about my mental health struggles, let's make sure I pause here. It'll hit harder. Doesn't that sound eerily plausible? After all, Meghan has admitted to practicing. The truth is, the interview wasn't just an outpouring of pain. It was a strategy meeting turned into a global spectacle. And here's where it gets even more interesting. They didn't do this alone. Sources close to their camp have hinted for years that media consultants, PR advisors, and trusted friends were involved in shaping their stories. Imagine the brainstorming sessions. Which revelations will generate the most sympathy? Which accusations will get the most press coverage? How do we make sure Oprah herself gasps at the right moment? These weren't accidents. They were carefully designed beats, like lines in a play. Harry's role in these rehearsals is fascinating. Meghan may have been the director, but Harry was the co-star. And co-stars don't always rehearse willingly. Insiders suggest Harry was sometimes hesitant, sometimes resistant. He had lived inside the monarchy all his life. He knew the weight of every accusation, the ripple effects every word could cause. But Meghan pushed, reminding him of the stakes, their future, their freedom, their brand. And so, Harry rehearsed. One can almost imagine the tension in the room. Meghan, polished, confident, pushing him to deliver his lines with conviction. Harry, fidgeting, unsure whether to obey his instincts or follow the script. The irony is stark. Harry, who claimed he finally found freedom, was now bound to rehearse lines that carried global consequences. Let's not underestimate the emotional toll of these rehearsals. Practicing accusations about family members isn't the same as practicing for a television show. When Meghan repeated lines about Kate making her cry, When Harry rehearsed lines about his father cutting him off, those weren't just words. They were daggers sharpened in advance. Imagine the weight of repeating them over and over until they felt natural, until they sounded spontaneous. By the time the cameras rolled, the wounds they rehearsed may have felt deeper than ever because they had lived them in rehearsal before living them on screen. And here's the part that will shock you. The Oprah interview rehearsals weren't about inventing lies out of thin air. They were about twisting the truth just enough to achieve maximum effect. Take a kernel of truth, exaggerate the pain, heighten the emotion, pause at the right moment, and suddenly you've transformed reality into something bigger, more dramatic, more unforgettable. It's not fabrication. It's performance. And performance, in this case, was indistinguishable from reality. This raises a question. How much of what we saw was genuine, and how much was rehearsed artifice? Did Meghan really cry in that moment? Or was it a tear she practiced shedding in front of the mirror? Did Harry's voice really crack from pain, or from running through the same line dozens of times until it became muscle memory? That's the uncomfortable truth of rehearsals. After enough repetition, even the performer can't tell where truth ends and performance begins. Think about the iconic moments. Oprah's shocked, "What?" when Meghan revealed conversations about Archie's skin color. Meghan's grave tone when describing her mental health struggles. Harry's defiance when speaking about financial severance. Each moment was delivered with precision. Each moment landed like a bombshell. And now we know why. They had been tested, rehearsed, sharpened long before broadcast. But there's an even darker layer. These rehearsals weren't just about performance. They were about strategy. Meghan and Harry knew the stakes. They weren't just telling their story. They were waging war against an institution. The palace had centuries of power, an army of advisors, and the weight of tradition on its side. Meghan and Harry, they had their words, their performance, their narrative. To win the war of perception, they couldn't afford to wing it. They had to rehearse. And yet, even as they perfected their performance, the cracks showed. Harry reportedly grew frustrated with certain lines, hesitant to exaggerate too far. Meghan, determined, insisted on precision. This dynamic, one pushing, the other resisting, reveals the complexity of those rehearsals. It wasn't just a performance. It was a tug-of-war over truth itself. Have you ever practiced for something so much that by the time you performed, it felt natural, inevitable, even real? That's what these rehearsals did. By the time Oprah's cameras rolled, Meghan and Harry weren't lying. They were living their rehearsed truth. And that's why it was so convincing. But here's the cliffhanger. The rehearsals, as shocking as they are, were only the beginning. Because once you start practicing lines, you're not just preparing to tell your truth, you're preparing to reshape it. And that's exactly what Meghan and Harry did. They twisted events, exaggerated pain, and crafted a narrative designed to dominate headlines. And when you hear just how far those exaggerations went, which stories were bent out of shape, and which moments were designed purely for sympathy, you'll realize the Oprah interview wasn't just rehearsed, it was rewritten. What is the difference between sharing your pain and performing it? Between recounting events as they happened and reshaping them to guarantee the maximum gasp, the deepest tear, the loudest applause? This is the line Meghan Markle and Prince Harry crossed in the lead-up to the Oprah interview. And at 44, Meghan has now admitted that the boundary wasn't blurred by accident. It was erased deliberately. The truth is, the rehearsals weren't just about practicing delivery. They were about twisting the narrative, taking ordinary events, or even painful but nuanced ones, and magnifying them into tragedies that would ignite headlines. That was the strategy. The more sensational the story, the more sympathy it generated. The more shocking the claim, the harder it was for the palace to fight back. Let's start with one of the most infamous moments. Meghan's claim that the palace refused to give Archie a title because of concerns about his skin color. Remember the hush that fell when Oprah's eyes widened, when Meghan paused before answering, when she said that unnamed royals had speculated about how dark his skin might be. That moment sent shockwaves around the globe. But here's the thing. Royal protocol dictates that Archie was never entitled to a title at birth. It had nothing to do with race. It was a rule established decades earlier, long before Meghan entered the scene. And yet, in the interview, the narrative was reshaped. A protocol became a prejudice. A dry rulebook became a weapon of racism. By twisting the context, Meghan transformed a bureaucratic technicality into a worldwide scandal. Now, pause for a second. How many people do you know still believe Archie was denied a title because of race? How many arguments online? How many angry editorials? How many think pieces were written on the back of that claim? That's the power of narrative manipulation. A carefully chosen twist turned ordinary procedure into global outrage. Another infamous example, Meghan's revelation about her mental health struggles. She said she went to palace officials, desperate for help, even considering ending her life, and was coldly told there was nothing they could do. It was a heartbreaking moment, one that left viewers shaken. But here's the contradiction. Meghan had access to private doctors, therapists, and medical services at her fingertips, as all royals do. No one could have physically barred her from seeking treatment. The palace may have resisted public acknowledgement, but the idea that she was completely abandoned is questionable. Yet by framing it as absolute neglect, Meghan ensured maximum sympathy. It wasn't just her pain. It was a story designed to paint the monarchy as monstrous. Then there was the now infamous "Kate made me cry" anecdote. Meghan revealed that in the lead-up to her wedding, Kate Middleton had reduced her to tears over bridesmaid dresses. Later reporting suggested the reverse, that Meghan had upset Kate. But in the Oprah interview, Meghan confidently claimed the victim role, insisting the palace twisted the story to make her look like the villain. Here again, nuance was erased. Wedding tensions, which happen in nearly every family, were magnified into evidence of systemic cruelty. And of course, it wasn't just about Kate. It was about feeding into the broader narrative of Meghan as the isolated, misunderstood outsider, tormented by an unfeeling family. Let's not forget Harry's contributions. His story about being financially cut off by his father Charles, delivered with exasperation, painted him as abandoned and destitute. But the truth? Harry walked away from royal duties by choice, rejecting the financial support that came with them. He was hardly penniless. He had millions from Princess Diana's inheritance and lucrative deals on the horizon. Yet the way he told it in that interview, he was a man stripped bare, cast into the wilderness by a cruel father. Another twist. Another exaggeration. Another sympathetic headline. Here's the question for you. How many of these revelations did you believe at face value? How many left you furious at the palace, convinced Meghan and Harry had been victimized at every turn? If even one of them was exaggerated, and Meghan now admits they were rehearsed for maximum effect, then what does that say about the rest? This isn't just about truth versus lies. It's about editing reality. Imagine taking a photograph and adjusting the brightness, cropping out the distracting details, adding a filter to enhance the mood. That's what Meghan and Harry did with their stories. They didn't always invent, they curated. They polished. They reframed until the ordinary became extraordinary, until the complicated became black and white. And the public, craving clarity, swallowed it whole. Why? Because we all love a story with heroes and villains. Meghan knew this instinctively. In her version of events, she and Harry were the underdogs, fighting against a centuries-old institution dripping with racism and cruelty. The royals were the villains, cold, uncaring, outdated. The Oprah interview rehearsals weren't just about telling their side. They were about ensuring the world knew which side to choose. And in those early days, the tactic worked. But here's the danger of twisting the narrative. Once you start, you can't stop. Each exaggeration feeds the next. Each dramatic beat raises the stakes. And before long, you're not just rehearsing lines, you're rewriting history. Meghan and Harry weren't recounting events as they happened. They were shaping a myth of persecution, one designed to ensure their survival outside the monarchy. And now, years later, with Meghan admitting it was scripted, we see the cracks. The sympathy they won has curdled into suspicion. The headlines they generated now haunt them. Because once the truth is exposed, that the narrative was twisted for maximum effect, the entire house of cards begins to tremble. But one story stands out above the rest. One story wasn't just exaggerated. It wasn't just reframed. It was, according to insiders, manufactured to provoke the most devastating reaction of all. And it's a story that Meghan herself may now regret rehearsing. Because when we dig into the details of Archie's birth and the narrative that was woven around it, we discover that the truth is even murkier than we imagined. From the very beginning, Archie Harrison's birth was wrapped in a cloak of mystery. The media frenzy was relentless, the palace was evasive, and Meghan and Harry fueled the speculation with carefully chosen words. But what if I told you that the most tender part of their story, the birth of their first child, wasn't just shielded for privacy, but was deliberately manipulated, rehearsed, and even twisted into a narrative designed for maximum drama? This is where the line between truth and performance becomes almost impossible to see. Let's start with what Meghan and Harry wanted us to believe. In the Oprah interview, Meghan described Archie's arrival as a bittersweet moment. An innocent child denied his rightful birthright, shut out of royal protections, and caught in the crossfire of a cold, uncaring institution. It was a powerful image, a newborn already victimized by systemic prejudice. And millions believed it. Why wouldn't they? A mother's anguish is one of the most convincing performances in the world. But here's the contradiction. Archie's lack of a title wasn't discrimination. It wasn't a snub. It was protocol. Royal rules established under King George V dictated that only grandchildren of the monarch automatically receive prince or princess titles. Archie, as Queen Elizabeth's great-grandchild, didn't qualify at birth. This wasn't about race. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about a century-old rulebook. Yet in the Oprah interview, Meghan and Harry presented it as a calculated slight, a cruel reminder that their son was less than in the eyes of the palace. Ask yourself, how many people you know still believe Archie was stripped of his title because of racism? That's the power of twisting reality. Take a dry fact, reframe it with emotional resonance, and watch as the narrative burns through headlines around the world. By rehearsing and polishing this story, Meghan ensured that millions would walk away convinced her child had been personally targeted. But the controversy didn't stop there. Meghan revealed that there had been concerns and conversations about how dark Archie's skin might be, delivered with a pause, a lowered gaze, and Oprah's perfectly timed what? It was the most explosive moment of the interview. The audience didn't just hear it. They felt it. Outrage boiled over instantly. The monarchy was accused of harboring racism at the highest levels. Newspapers printed scathing headlines. Politicians condemned it. Activists rallied behind Meghan. And yet, the details of this story remain curiously vague. Who said it? When did they say it? Was it a single offhand comment, blown up into a scandal, or a conversation rehearsed and delivered to land like a bomb? Meghan never provided specifics, and Harry later contradicted parts of the account. That's the danger of rehearsed storytelling. You can polish the delivery, but you can't erase the inconsistencies forever. And when those cracks appear, the whole narrative begins to look shaky. Now, let's talk about the secrecy surrounding Archie's actual birth. Unlike previous royal babies, his arrival was shrouded in confusion. Official statements contradicted themselves. Meghan and Harry kept reporters in the dark. Even the location of the birth was unclear at first. Was it Portland Hospital? Was it Frogmore Cottage? The press and public were left scrambling for answers. And while some chalked it up to Meghan's desire for privacy, others saw something more calculated, a deliberate attempt to control the narrative, to keep the public guessing, to heighten the drama. Behind closed doors, this secrecy became part of the rehearsed script. In the lead-up to the Oprah interview, Meghan and Harry leaned heavily on the idea that Archie's birth was surrounded by palace coldness and hostility. They painted themselves as protective parents, forced to shield their son from an institution that refused to embrace him. But ask yourself, was this genuine fear, or was it a crafted storyline rehearsed until it felt real? Consider the way Meghan described holding Archie, her voice trembling as she spoke of the denial of titles and protection. Do you remember how you felt? Did you picture a mother clutching her newborn, fighting back tears at the cruelty of it all? That wasn't an accident. That was a performance, perfected in rehearsal. Meghan knew exactly where to pause, exactly how to let her voice crack, exactly how to make the world see Archie as the innocent casualty of royal neglect. And Harry? His contributions were just as rehearsed. His pointed comments about his family's concerns regarding skin color weren't blurted out. They were strategically placed. Delivered after Meghan's revelations, they added fuel to the fire, reinforcing the image of Archie as the target of prejudice. It was a 1-2 punch. Meghan's sorrow, then Harry's confirmation. The audience was left with no room for doubt. But now, knowing what we know, shouldn't we question whether this too was crafted in advance? The irony is staggering. The royal family has always been accused of staging their public appearances, of presenting a polished image for the cameras. And yet, in leaving the monarchy, Meghan and Harry fell into the same trap. They rehearsed, scripted, and polished their own version of events, then sold it as raw, unfiltered truth. Archie's birth became not just a family milestone, but a weapon in their media war. And this weapon worked. For months after the interview, the world debated Archie's treatment. Was he the victim of racism? Was he denied his birthright? Was Meghan unfairly targeted as a mother of mixed heritage? These questions dominated headlines. But here's the painful truth. Much of that outrage was sparked by a story rehearsed for effect, not born from spontaneous honesty. Have you ever wondered how Archie will feel one day when he's old enough to watch that interview? To see his parents use his birth as a central pillar of their narrative, exaggerated and twisted to sway global opinion? That's the collateral damage of rehearsed storytelling. The next generation inherits the consequences. And yet, Archie's story wasn't the only one rehearsed to perfection. There were others, stories of family feuds, of betrayals, of cold shoulders behind palace doors. Stories that, when polished and performed, painted Meghan and Harry as tragic victims in a Shakespearean drama. But here's where the story takes another sharp turn. Because while Meghan and Harry rehearsed their lines carefully, not all of them agreed on how far to push the exaggeration. And in those private battles over truth and fiction, the cracks in their partnership began to show. Harry's role in the Oprah interview rehearsals is one of the most fascinating and perhaps most tragic pieces of this entire puzzle. He was not just a husband sitting by his wife's side. He was the co-star of a performance that would be broadcast to millions, the son of a future king lending credibility to every line rehearsed behind closed doors. But what's most striking is the tension that seems to have existed between Harry's instincts and Meghan's determination. Think about Harry for a moment. This is a man who grew up in the heart of the monarchy, whose every move was scrutinized by the press from the moment he was born. He knew how dangerous words could be. He had seen scandals destroy reputations, headlines ruin lives. He had also lived through the death of his mother, Princess Diana, and carried deep scars from the way she was hounded by the media. For Harry, media wasn't just a tool. It was both a weapon and a curse. And now, years later, he found himself rehearsing lines designed to make his family look cold, cruel, and prejudiced. Can you imagine the inner conflict? Insiders describe Harry as sometimes hesitant during the rehearsals. Meghan, with her acting background, leaned into the process, polishing phrasing, perfecting delivery, pushing for maximum impact. Harry, on the other hand, often fidgeted, worried about how far they were going. Do we really need to say it like that? He may have asked. Or, isn't this going to burn every bridge we have left? But Meghan, determined to seize control of their story, reportedly pressed forward. She knew the stakes. For her, the interview wasn't just catharsis, it was survival. This dynamic, Meghan as the director, Harry as the reluctant co-star, reveals so much. Meghan rehearsed like a professional actress preparing for the role of her life. Harry, by contrast, was less performer and more reluctant participant, pulled into the script because without his voice, her story lacked royal weight. Oprah interviewing Meghan alone would have been explosive, but with Harry sitting there, confirming details, reinforcing her narrative, that gave the performance global credibility. His royal blood was the stamp of authenticity. One of the clearest examples came with the discussion of finances. Meghan had rehearsed her lines about being cut off, about struggling to survive without palace support. But it was Harry's delivery, his frustration as he explained that his father had literally cut him off financially, that turned the moment into a headline. And yet, the reality was far murkier. Harry had millions from Diana's inheritance, and lucrative deals were already being negotiated. He wasn't destitute, but his line landed because it was rehearsed to sound like abandonment. Harry, perhaps uneasily, became the sympathetic son discarded by a cold father. Then there was the discussion of racism. Meghan's carefully rehearsed revelation about Archie's skin color was devastating. But notice how the interview was structured. Meghan dropped the bombshell. Oprah reacted, and then Harry reinforced it, confirming conversations had taken place. This was no accident. It was a choreography rehearsed behind closed doors. Meghan as the first punch, Harry as the confirmation, the 1-2 strike that left audiences breathless. But behind the rehearsals, sources suggest Harry wasn't always comfortable. Some accounts say he balked at naming names, refusing to reveal exactly who made the comment about Archie's skin color. That hesitation may have been genuine, a sign of his lingering loyalty to his family. But it also reveals the cracks in the rehearsed script. Meghan wanted impact. Harry wanted restraint. The compromise? A vague accusation, devastating enough to ignite headlines, but not specific enough to burn bridges completely. Do you see the irony here? Harry had once accused the royal family of staging their lives, of presenting polished images for the cameras. And yet, in the Oprah rehearsals, he himself was being directed into a performance that was just as curated, just as staged. He had left one theater only to step onto another stage. This time with Meghan as the director. This raises a haunting question. Was Harry a willing actor, or was he manipulated into playing a role he didn't fully believe in? Some argue that Harry was blinded by love, willing to echo Meghan's lines because he trusted her. Others believe he knew exactly what he was doing, that he saw the rehearsals as necessary, that he recognized their future outside the monarchy depended on controlling the narrative. Maybe both are true. Maybe Harry was both victim and participant, caught between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to the truth. One moment stands out above all. During the rehearsals, Meghan reportedly pressed Harry to open up about his relationship with Prince William. The idea was simple. Harry's pain about his brother would humanize him, make him relatable. But Harry resisted. He didn't want to rehearse lines about William. He knew that once those words were spoken on Oprah's stage, the rift would become permanent. And yet, under the lights, in front of Oprah, Harry admitted that the relationship was strained, that space had grown between them. Was that line spontaneous, or had it been rehearsed over and over until Harry surrendered? That's the tragedy of Harry's role. Every time he opened his mouth, the world saw authenticity. The spare heir, finally speaking his truth. But behind the curtain, many of those words were crafted, rehearsed, shaped to fit a narrative designed for sympathy. The boy who once swore he would never play the palace's media game ended up playing another version of it, one perhaps even more manipulative. And when Meghan later admitted that the interview had been rehearsed, it didn't just tarnish her credibility. It tarnished Harry's as well. Because if his lines were practiced, if his emotions were directed, then how much of what he said reflected his truth, and how much was just the role he had been asked to play? Here's the chilling thought. Harry may not even know the answer anymore. Rehearsal has a way of blending truth and performance until they become indistinguishable. Maybe he convinced himself it was all true. Maybe he believed every line because he had practiced it enough. That's the cruelest part of performance. You can lose track of the boundary between reality and rehearsal. But there's one moment Harry refused to practice. One moment Meghan wanted rehearsed, sharpened, perfected, but Harry resisted. And when the cameras rolled, that unscripted silence spoke louder than any rehearsed line. Oprah Winfrey, a name that carries the weight of truth-telling, empathy, and cultural authority. For decades, she has been the go-to interviewer for revelations that shaped the public imagination. When Meghan and Harry chose Oprah, it wasn't just about friendship or comfort. It was about credibility. If they wanted the world to believe their story, there was no better stage, no better host. But here's the haunting question. Was Oprah herself fooled? Or was she, knowingly or not, cast as part of the performance? Think back to that interview. Oprah's reactions were as iconic as Meghan and Harry's revelations. The gasp, the widened eyes, the incredulous "what?" when Meghan revealed the supposed concerns about Archie's skin color. These moments weren't just spontaneous. They became viral, replayed in memes, GIFs, and news clips around the world. Oprah wasn't just conducting an interview. She was, in effect, a supporting actor in a performance that had been rehearsed long before the cameras rolled. But let's pause here. Oprah is not naive. She's one of the sharpest interviewers alive. She has decades of experience spotting insincerity, reading body language, and pressing when she senses there's more beneath the surface. Could she really have missed the signs of rehearsal? Or did she know on some level and simply play along? Because the narrative was too powerful, too marketable to resist? Consider the structure of the interview. Oprah didn't barge in with hard questions. She guided gently, creating space for Meghan to drop carefully timed bombshells. The pacing was immaculate, almost too immaculate. Meghan spoke. Oprah reacted. The audience gasped. Then Harry entered to reinforce. That rhythm doesn't just happen. It felt like choreography. Ask yourself, do you remember the moment Meghan declared she had been silenced, or when she described feeling suicidal? Notice how Oprah didn't interrupt too quickly, how she allowed pauses, how she leaned in at just the right time. It made for powerful television. But in retrospect, doesn't it feel almost too perfect? As if Oprah, whether she realized it or not, had rehearsed her role as well. Not the lines, but the beats, the reactions, the empathetic gasps that would carry Meghan's story further than her words alone. And then there's the question of Oprah's production team. Do you really believe they didn't know what was coming? Interviews of this scale are not improvised. Teams spend weeks preparing, mapping out topics, anticipating revelations. Meghan and Harry's camp would have briefed Oprah's producers, carefully crafting which topics to emphasize, which revelations to highlight. That doesn't mean Oprah knew every detail, but she almost certainly knew enough to brace for the bombs, and maybe to shape her reactions for maximum impact. Here's the uncomfortable possibility. Oprah may have been both participant and victim. Participant, because she lent her credibility to a narrative rehearsed for maximum sympathy. Victim, because she may not have known just how much of it had been scripted. And that's the danger. When you stage manage an interview, even the interviewer becomes part of the theater without realizing it. Think about the branding. Oprah's name ensured the interview would be treated as gospel. If Meghan and Harry had sat down with a tabloid journalist, the claims would have been dismissed as sensationalism. But Oprah? She's untouchable. Her very presence framed the interview as truth. And Meghan and Harry knew that. They rehearsed not just for the audience at home, but for Oprah herself. Every pause, every sigh, every carefully timed revelation was designed to extract maximum empathy from the one woman whose reactions mattered most in that moment. Because if Oprah believed them, the world would too. Now, imagine Oprah's position today, hearing Meghan's confession that the interview had been rehearsed. Doesn't it tarnish her as well? Oprah's brand is built on authenticity. To discover that she was, in effect, hosting a scripted performance undermines her reputation as much as Meghan's. Did Meghan consider that? Or was Oprah simply collateral damage in Meghan's pursuit of control? There's also the irony. For years, critics accused Oprah of staging moments for ratings. Tears on cue. Revelations crafted for maximum drama. And yet, in the Meghan and Harry interview, Oprah may have been outplayed. She wasn't staging the drama this time. It was Meghan and Harry. And Oprah, the master of authenticity, became the unwitting stage partner in their performance. But perhaps Oprah did suspect. Perhaps she knew the lines were polished, that the beats were too perfect, but she went along because the end result mattered more than the process. Ratings soared. The interview became one of the defining cultural moments of the decade. For Oprah, it was a triumph. For Meghan and Harry, it was validation. For the audience, it was unforgettable television. Maybe everyone got what they wanted until now. Because with Meghan's confession, the entire production is recast. Oprah's gasps are no longer reactions to raw truth. They're reactions to rehearsed lines. Her credibility, once her greatest asset, has been weaponized against her. She may have thought she was hosting history. Instead, she was hosting theater. But here's the twist. If Oprah was fooled or complicit, what about the producers behind the scenes? The ones who shaped the final cut, who decided which pauses to linger on, which close-ups to emphasize, which soundbites would dominate headlines. Were they in on the performance? Or did they simply edit what they were given, unaware they were polishing rehearsed lines rather than spontaneous truth? That's the haunting question we now face. Just how far did the deception spread? Did Meghan and Harry fool only the audience? Or did they fool Oprah, her producers, and perhaps even themselves in the process? And when we examine the mechanics of media manipulation itself, the deliberate staging, the selective editing, the art of shaping perception, we'll see that the Oprah interview was not an isolated event. It was a masterclass in strategy, one that fits into a much larger pattern of how Meghan and Harry control their story. Let's pull back the curtain even further. What Meghan and Harry did with Oprah wasn't just an interview. It was a textbook example of media manipulation 101, a masterclass in how to shape public opinion control a narrative, and weaponize emotion. And the shocking part? They didn't invent anything new. They simply borrowed tactics from politics, Hollywood, and advertising, fields that have perfected the art of making audiences believe, feel, and act in predictable ways. Think about it. When politicians prepare for debates, do they just show up and speak their truth? Of course not. They rehearse lines, test phrases in focus groups, and even practice hand gestures to make themselves seem more authentic. When Hollywood stars go on press tours, do you think those charming anecdotes are spontaneous? Hardly. They've been told, refined, and retold dozens of times until they land with maximum charm. Meghan and Harry brought those same techniques to Oprah's garden, and the world fell for it. Start with the basics: emotional engineering. Every powerful piece of media content, whether it's a commercial, a speech, or an interview, follows a rhythm designed to keep audiences hooked. Highs and lows, tension and release, tears followed by moments of hope. Meghan and Harry's interview hit all those beats. Meghan's revelation about suicidal thoughts plunged the audience into sorrow. Moments later, her story of Harry saving her life by leaving the monarchy offered redemption. That isn't coincidence. That's emotional pacing. Next, framing the narrative. In media strategy, framing is everything. If you control how a story is told, you control how it's perceived. Meghan and Harry framed themselves as underdogs, trapped in an archaic system, silenced by a cruel institution. The royals, in contrast, were painted as villains, heartless, out of touch, even racist. Once that frame was established, every revelation fit neatly inside it. Every pause, every accusation, every anecdote reinforced the story arc. The audience wasn't just hearing words. They were being guided through a carefully constructed plot. Then there's selective storytelling. Notice how Meghan and Harry chose certain stories and left others out. We heard about Archie's denied title, but not about the rulebook that explained why. We heard about Harry being cut off financially, but not about his millions in inheritance. We heard about Kate making Meghan cry, but not about the reports suggesting the reverse. That's selective editing, a technique used by every filmmaker and advertiser. Tell just enough to make your point. Leave out the messy contradictions. The result? A story that feels airtight, even if it isn't. And what about performative authenticity? This is perhaps the most insidious tactic of all. In today's media landscape, people crave authenticity. They want to feel like they're seeing the real person. But here's the trick. Authenticity can be faked. Meghan's pauses, her lowered voice, the moments when she appeared to fight back tears. These were not spontaneous cracks in her armor. They were deliberate, practiced, perfected. It's the same trick reality TV uses. Edit moments of vulnerability into the script so the audience feels like they're seeing behind the mask. In truth, the mask is just another layer of the performance. Let's not forget strategic timing. Why did the interview air in March 2021? Because timing matters. It was scheduled during a global pandemic when people were starved for distraction and highly attuned to stories of isolation and mental health struggles. It aired just before Prince Philip's declining health became public, ensuring the royals couldn't easily fight back without appearing callous. And it aired at a moment when Meghan and Harry needed to solidify their brand outside the palace. That wasn't luck. That was calculation. Now, ask yourself, how many of these tactics have you fallen for in your own life? Have you ever been swayed by a commercial that made you cry, only to realize later it was selling soap? Have you ever listened to a politician's heartfelt story, only to discover it was tested in focus groups for emotional impact? Meghan and Harry used the same playbook, and it worked. But here's where the manipulation cuts deepest. They weren't just selling a product or winning an election. They were selling pain. Their family drama, their fractured relationships. They weaponized their own trauma for public consumption, turning private struggles into public entertainment. And millions of people bought it, because the performance was just that convincing. The irony is painful. Meghan and Harry positioned themselves as victims of palace manipulation, claiming the royals controlled narratives through spin and secrecy. Yet in reality, they used the exact same tactics, perhaps even more effectively. They accused the palace of staging life, while staging their own performance for Oprah's cameras. They condemned media spin, while spinning their own version of events into gold. It was hypocrisy wrapped in sincerity, sold as authenticity. And the consequences? Devastating. Relationships shattered. Trust eroded. Public opinion weaponized. A monarchy weakened. A family divided. All because of a performance rehearsed.